To tip off this NBA season on FanDuel, you can choose your own rewards, which means you can play your game any way you want.
I get to choose my rewards?
Yep.
Great! Now, excuse me while I lock in.
All customers choose your own reward right now in the FanDuel app. 21 plus and present in select states. 18 plus in Kentucky. Opt-in required. Rewards are non-withdrawable. Restrictions apply, including bonus and token expiration, leg requirement, and max wager amount. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey, everybody, it is Jay Scott with The Hook, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Hope everyone's getting ready for the holidays here. We're continuing with our holiday series with Tales of the Sunset Strip. We all know about it. Every rocker, every rock fan knows about the Sunset Strip, how important it was back in the 80s, late 70s, throughout the 80s, how it became to be, what it was like, and how it will never be replicated again. We're welcoming back Gerald Guzman, who was our first guest 5 months ago when we started this podcast. How you doing today, Gerald?
Hey, I'm doing good. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, man. It's been a while since you've been on. The Randy Rhoads podcast episode was very well received. A lot of people enjoyed it, but it's been way too long.
That. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for that first opportunity to talk about Randy, and thanks for bringing me back.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I been looking forward to it. I know after we did that episode, we talked about what we were going to do next with you as a guest, and the topic of the Sunset Strip and what it meant to 80s rock was the topic that we both agreed upon that should be next. I kind of went off on a tangent with my music discussion episodes about the current state of rock, and I kind of kept that going, and we'll continue to do that throughout 2020. But now that we have the opportunity to have you back and talk about the subject that we always wanted to talk about since that first episode, it's glad you're here. And yes, the 80s rock Sunset Strip rock and roll scene.
Man. I was one of the few people from here in the Midwest who got to go out there for a little while and actually experience it myself. So it was, like you said, there's nothing like it, and there'll never be anything like it again. It was quite an experience.
Yes, it was. I mean, I was young enough. I never got a chance to experience the Sunset Strip, the rock scene back in the 80s in Hollywood. But we all knew about it, right? That's where predominantly all the bands were coming from, at least in the early part of the 80s. And if you were in a small town, whether in the Midwest or in the South or out in the East, a lot of the local bands that were doing well made the trek to the Sunset Strip to try to get noticed and to try to get a record deal. That was a pretty common thing back then.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not every band that got signed out of LA was from LA. I mean, Poison traveled across the country from Pennsylvania, and then Axl Rose was from Indiana, and he went out there to make it. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you were a musician back in that era, Hollywood and the Sunset Strip is where you went to make it, to become a rock star. So absolutely.
The band Van Halen is really the one that propelled the Sunset Strip into everyone's mind back then. They were the first band coming out of LA that made it huge. They were from Pasadena. They were from the Valley, and they started playing Gazzarri's. And if you're really interested in the history of Van Halen prior to Van Halen 1, a great book by Greg Renoff called Van Halen Rising is a must for all Van Halen, for all rock and roll fans back in the day, back from then. And they really the ones that propelled that scene to start, because after Van Halen made it in the late 70s, you had bands like Mickey Ratt that later became Ratt, obviously Motley Crue.
Yep.
You had Quiet Riot
Yep.
with Randy Rhoads. Those were really the first few bands that were able to come out of that scene as a result of the Van Halen success.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Van Halen kind of kickstarted the whole scene in the 70s, and then it just exploded in the 80s.
Right, and the popularity gained from MTV from those bands, from really the three specific bands that I mentioned were Motley Crue, Ratt, and Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot, I believe, had the first #1 rock album in that era with Metal Health and Shout the Devil.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Shout the Devil. We all know the story of Motley Crue from the movie The Dirt.
Yep.
The Sunset Strip was very prevalent in that story, both in the book and the movie. Ratt, who came up from San Diego, was another band that was leading the way, especially with their success with the album Out of the Cellar, with the songs Round and Round and Back for More. So those were really the three bands that kind of propelled that scene to go even further, right? I mean,
because all those bands, because a lot of those bands broke in probably the like 83 to 80, early 80s, mid 80s, and then all of a sudden after 86, then it just exploded into the legendary status that we all know of.
People forget how raw the 80s or the early 80s rock era was. I mean, when you consider the Van Halen coming from the late 70s with Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2, when you listen to Women and Children First, obviously AC/DC was very prevalent back then with the album Back in Black. You had the new wave of British heavy metal with bands like Iron Maiden and Def Leppard. So it was very primitive.
Saxon and all that.
Yeah, Saxon and Tigers of Pantang. Obviously, Diamond Head had a huge influence on Metallica. You had bands coming from the Bay Area like Night Ranger and Y&T. On the East Coast, you had bands like Twisted Sister that were just, huge into the club scene out there. But when you listen to that early 80s era, it was very raw. And even the first Ratt EP, when you listen to that's completely different than anything Ratt did after that.
Yep, you're right. It was raw, and then the record industry stepped in and made it like polished and glam.
Well,
and
one of the bands we talk about, Motley Crue, is very, very much responsible for glamming it up, because I firmly believe that the back cover of Theater of Pain, coupled with the success of Home Sweet Home, changed everything. Because then every record label wanted to sign a band that was like Motley Crue, and the formula was you would release a rock song first, and then you would release a ballad second. And so every record label was trying to get their own Motley Crue signed to their label. So you're right. Once Motley Crue became this glam band with a #1 ballad, then that was the formula that everyone jumped on throughout the next few years in Hollywood. Plus the impact of that back cover too, as well. When you look at Motley Crue with Too Fast for Love, there were elements of glam with their look certainly in that period, but then they released a quintessential heavy metal record with Shout at the Devil. I mean, say what you want about Motley Crue now or how Motley Crue ended up with their type of music. Shout at the Devil with the cover, the black cover with the black on black pentagram, was a huge, huge influence on the heavy metal movement. That was a huge heavy metal record. And then going from that album into Theater of Pain, where they're basically in women's lingerie, all glammed up, and they got this power ballad on the album. I mean, like you just said, I mean, that changed the game with the record labels. Every band that was getting signed or had been signed had to glam it up and had to have their power ballad.
And it also reminds me of something that I remember happening back then too. you had bands that were like Crocus who were out in the late 70s and early 80s, right? And then you had who's another band from like Accept. They were out in the early 80s and they were pretty raw. And then when they got major record deals, or as the scene evolved, all of a sudden a band that was raw like Crocus, all of a sudden they're wearing clothes similar to what Motley Crue was wearing on the Theater of Pain album. All of a sudden, songs like Headhunter are turning into more poppy, hooky songs. So even bands that started out as being raw were being transformed by record labels to be more like Motley Crue.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I had that album Crocus with the song Midnight Maniac on it, and
there you go. That was the one that was the song I was trying to think of, and you got it. That's exactly it.
Yeah, I had.
How do you go from Headhunter to Midnight Maniac?
I mean,
the record label.
You could even go back and say, how do you go from Long Stick Goes Boom to Midnight Maniac? I mean,
right.
I had that cassette. I forget the name of the album that was on, but I had that cassette in 4th grade. And I remember there was a woman twirling on the cover that you could just see the bottom of her butt, right? And I remember my 4th grade teacher confiscating it from me, having my parents come in to talk to the principal. I was in a Catholic school. I was basically told I was going to hell for having that album. And it was crazy. But it was becoming more and more mainstream. I was the kid in the Catholic school because of my older brother that was always bringing rock music when all my friends were, bringing Culture Club and Men at Work and Duran Duran. I was bringing Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot. And it took a couple years before everyone started to follow what I was listening to because it was becoming more mainstream. But yes, you are right, because, I mean, when you look at Accept, they go from balls to the wall to Screaming for a Love Bite, and...
Right. Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was happening all in front of us, right? And then there were even bands that came later that I believe got stuck in that glam period that had to glam it up. They didn't have a choice. One of the bands that comes to mind is Cinderella. If you listen to Cinderella without looking at their videos, just listening to their music, they are not a hair band or glam band. They are a blues-based rock and roll band, and they got.
And then you look at the cover, of their first album, which doesn't make any sense as far as the music, like you just described, that they did.
Right. I mean, it was more in line with Aerosmith, more in line with AC/DC, and I still feel that if they didn't have that label, they would have been more relevant, more popular today, more accepted today, because now they're accepted as that hair metal band. And that's why I think really Tom Kiefer is trying to really get into his solo career and develop his solo albums, because he wants to get as far away from as possible from that label, because and I feel bad, because he should do that, right? I mean, he should accept, right. The music should be accepted, but unfortunately it always comes with that label of hair band metal.
Yeah, exactly.
So after the Theater of Pain record came out, everybody started to come out with, their glammed up look. I mean, one of the most glammed up album covers that I can think of off the top of my head is Look What the Cat Dragged In. I mean, there was, that was a complete influence from Theater of Pain. And I remember,
oh, of course.
Yeah, I remember getting that record, and there were a couple moments where I'm like, are these all guys, or is it a couple guys? Because, you couldn't really tell from that album cover, and that actually caused a lot of friction between Motley Crue and Poison for a long time, because Motley Crue felt that they blatantly stole their look. That's a different story for a different time, but...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that's really where it went. It went in that direction. And here was the biggest thing, right? Because everybody was glammed up. When you think of 80 to 85 and then 85 to 86, like midway point or whatever, the girls got into it. And that's what, made the Sunset Strip scene really take off, because the girls started listening to it. And whenever chicks are listening to the music, guys want to be around it. And it's a perfect formula. You see that in today's music now. You see that in every successful genre throughout time. Whenever there's girls wanting to dance or wanting to have a good time, that music genre is always going to be successful.
Well, I can tell you from my own personal experience, Poison wasn't one of my favorite bands back in the day, but I sure as hell went to every Poison concert because every hot chick I knew was going to be there.
Yep.
So
that is the truth. Whether it's Bon Jovi, whether it's Poison, whether it was Skid Row, Motley Crue, Ratt, I mean, it became a predominantly male audience, or it became from a predominantly male audience in the early 80s to predominantly a female audience. I mean, I remember the girls in my school over the summer going from Duran Duran wearing Bon Jovi, Poison t-shirts, all that stuff, and it became mainstream.
Well, my high school girlfriend went through that transformation because when I first started dating her, I think Michael Jackson was her favorite artist. And when we started dating, I started introducing her to heavy metal. And next thing you know, she's got Aquanet, her hair sprayed to the ceiling. She had naturally brown hair. She dyed it bleach blonde. She's in miniskirt. She's in bobby socks and high heels. She's got Motley Crue and Whitesnake and all that stuff on her wall. So she absolutely went through that transformation like a lot of other girls did.
My son always asks me, when these bands that he listens to, whether it's Greta Van Fleet, whether it's whomever, Dirty Honey, Joyous Wolf, he's like, when are these bands gonna really be popular and make it big? And I say, when chicks start listening. Once the girls, once the girls in your high school start listening to this stuff, everything will change.
Absolutely correct.
So let's get into
guys want to be with a girl. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, so let's get into your experiences on the Sunset Strip. I mean, I know you've got some stories to tell. Some are really interesting and really cool. But why don't we dive into that? What was your first experience hanging out in Hollywood, hanging out in the Sunset Strip? What was that like?
So in 1987, I turned 21. And so did my best friend. So we decided that since we were of age, because the drinking age was 21, obviously at the time, and still is. So when we turned 21, we're like, we're going to California for a vacation, and we're gonna experience the Sunset Strip firsthand. We'd seen all the videos on MTV, and it was like, we need to go check this out. So the summer of 87, we went out to California, and we stayed a week at a hotel right in the middle of Hollywood and went out every single night. There was music playing every night, whether it was the Roxy or the Troubadour, the Whiskey, and then of course, the famous Rainbow Bar and Grill where everybody ended up at, no matter what. So back in that day, I remember I was in California. I was in California when the Guns N' Roses album got released. So that was the big talk. Guns N' Roses album came out today, and so did Faster Pussycat. So everyone was thinking that these two bands were going to be the next best thing, the next big thing to break out of California. So there was also a club out there called the Cat House, which Ricky Rackman and the singer from Faster Pussycat co-managed or co-owned, and we would go to that too. And there was anybody and everybody that you can imagine was hanging out there too. I remember going to the Cat House. I know I've told you the story before, but I remember going to the Cat House one night. Faster Pussycat was actually the band playing that night, and I was hanging out with a band that was from Chicago. They were called War Cry in Chicago, and then they changed their name to Tommy Gun, and then they moved out to California to just try to make it, just like any band would want to do at that time. Go to Hollywood because that's where the scene was. And we were hanging out. One of the guys from the band points out this tall, skinny, blonde-haired guy standing kind of by himself. Nobody's talking to him, just kind of hanging out. And he's like, "Hey, that's Zach Wild. That's the new guitar player for Ozzy." And I remember my brother and I beelining over to him and having this awesome conversation with him because he He was from New Jersey. He was in California for the first time. He was in rehearsals with Ozzy. He was telling us about how they wrote, how they were writing the songs and what rehearsal was like. And he said, he would look over and he would see Geezer Butler, playing bass and just bobbing his head and totally jamming out. And, God, that was just such a great conversation and a great night. Because at the time, Zach was like us. He was a young, up and coming, musician who got this awesome opportunity, and he was living his dream. And, so that was super cool. And another time, being at, it could have been the same night, it might have been a different night, because I've been to the Cat House a few times. I remember meeting King Diamond and talking to him at the bar. And, my girlfriend was a huge King Diamond fan, so I asked him if he would sign get his autograph for her. I remember him signing a napkin and putting a bunch of upside down crosses on it. So, things like that were super, super cool. And then basically you could just the strip itself. I mean, there was just people everywhere walking up and down Sunset Boulevard, and all these bands were just handing out flyers. Come see my band. Come see that, we're playing here. A lot of bands, you never heard of and never heard of again. And some bands like actually made it, or got a deal. I remember, Pretty Boy Floyd, was walking around flyering, and I was talking to them, and I don't think they were from California. I think they had relocated too, and then a few months later they got signed. So it was just the street was just filled with a bunch of bands promoting, and a bunch of girls, girls up and down the street, just all in high heels and leather skirts and big hair, and it was just like unreal. It was amazing.
Now, when you talk about the scene, when you talk about the Sunset Strip, and stories that I've read about or seen in documentaries, they always mention the flyers and how they were on everything that you could, anything you could post them on, they were on. And it was just, and in the morning you'd see all these flyers all over the street, basically. And it was, it was so important to that scene to try to get bands competing against one another.
Yeah, it was crazy because, I mean, you think about it, back then, there was no social media, and there was no, cell phones or any of that kind of stuff. So really, the only way you could let people know about your band was to either have an ad in a local magazine, or to be personally out on the street with a stack of flyers and handing them to everybody that you met, and hope that a small percentage, 10% of all these people that you've met, hopefully at least 10% of those people will hold on to your flyer and come to your show that week or the following week. But I mean, flyers everywhere, flyers on the street, flyers on the poles, flyers on abandoned buildings. I mean, there's just flyers everywhere, of every single color too. The pastel colors were the ones that a lot of the bands got because they wanted something that caught your eye. So there was fluorescent orange and fluorescent green and fluorescent yellow, and it's like they were all the same. They logo and a glammed up picture of the band, and then where they were playing that week. From what I remember, it was just like it was like unbelievable. And then even before you'd say you mentioned earlier, the next morning there'd be flyers all over the street. Well, it was like that at night too, because there's a lot of people that you'd hand a flyer to, and they just drop it or throw it down. So you figure hundreds of people flyering, hundreds of flyers being handed to you, and you keep some, you drop others, and it was just everywhere. So
that's amazing. You mentioned that you were out there the day that the Guns N' Roses debut, Appetite for Destruction, was released, and if I remember correctly, that album did not do anything for the first month. It wasn't until they re-released the video for Welcome to the Jungle several months later that people finally picked up on it. But I remember when that video came out, it was like dead on arrival. It didn't do anything.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That was the difference. So, I've been in Chicago since I was a kid, right? So I'm out in California. Guns N' Roses album drops. The Faster Pussycat album drops. Everyone in California is buzzing about those two bands. Which one of these two bands are going to make it? They're the next best thing to come out of California. And then trips over. I come back to Chicago, and you're right. I didn't hear from Guns N' Roses for months after that. I don't remember radio. Do you remember radio in Chicago playing Guns N' Roses or anything? Because I don't.
Not in the beginning. Not when it first came out.
Yeah.
I know VVX, picked up on it several months later. Back in the day, when that was going on, it kind of flipped in terms of what broke bands. It used to be radio. FM radio broke the bands, but it was MTV, and then radio would follow. And I remember watching Headbangers Ball, and the debut for Guns N' Roses came out, and I don't know if it was Ricky Rathman or Adam Curry who was hosting Headbangers Ball at that point, but it came out, and I don't know if people were ready for that look when it came out. I think it was pretty
sleazy.
Yeah, it was different. It was different. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
it took a while. In actuality, though, Faster Pussycat's album was more well received than originally than Appetite for Destruction. I remember hearing Cat House and Bathroom Wall, Don't Change That Number, all those songs that were on that debut record from Faster Pussycat. That was played more on radio in Chicago than Guns N' Roses was.
Yeah, and I remember they were the first of the two bands. They were the first ones to jump on a major tour, because I remember seeing Faster Pussycat with Ace Frehley and Y&T at the Aragon.
I was at that show.
So yeah, because how long it was? I don't think Guns N' Roses came to Illinois till
Aerosmith
the album came out in '87. I don't. Was that '87? I don't think that was until '88. So they came a year later.
Yeah.
But Faster Pussycat came to Illinois first in '87, but Guns N' Roses didn't get here until '88.
Yeah. No, it's amazing, how that worked out. I don't know who made the decision to repackage the debut or re-release the single, but it was the right one. And again, I've said it before, music is all about timing. And what didn't, resonate in the beginning for Guns N' Roses, it certainly did after that, because I think once Faster Pussycat came out, I think, there's more kind of a push for quote-unquote sleaze rock. And Guns N' Roses came out, Welcome to the Jungle, and they followed it up with Sweet Child of Mine. And they just jumped out of the stratosphere.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden they were just out of the stratosphere at that point. I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, they started out slow, like you said, and then all of a sudden, a year later, boom, they just exploded. And now they are who they are. Legendary.
Now, you made mention, too, about the Zakk Wylde conversation. He was under 21 when he first joined Ozzy, right?
Yeah. So, how he got into the Cat House is beyond me. But I think the Cat House had some, they would let certain people slide in. Whatever. They probably had paid off the door guy or whatever. But yeah, Zak's, I think, maybe younger than me. So if I was 21 and I was there, he was probably 19 or 20 at the time. Yeah, and so, like I said, he was just this tall, skinny, long, blonde-haired kid standing by himself, and he wasn't with anybody. No one from Ozzy's camp. No bodyguards. No roadie types. No handlers. Nothing. Here's this kid just standing by himself in the middle of the Cat House, and not one single person was talking to him, and nobody knew who he was except when my buddy pointed him out. And then all of a sudden, like I said, my brother and I went to talk to him, and he was so super cool. I mean, he was surprised that we knew who he was. And then he just completely opened up and just talked to us I think it's at least an hour. I mean, about everything. He was telling us about, when he was at home in New Jersey, learning how to play Randy Rose's solos. And then, you know, to writing, how he was telling us how he wrote what the lead song off of No Rest for the Wicked. Do you remember the name of it? Because I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Miracle Man?
Thank you. So he was saying that he wrote Miracle Man. He took a Jimi Hendrix riff and just kind of modified it and then turned it to Miracle Man. So stuff like that. So he was giving us inside information about how he was writing music and how they were coming up with the riffs. And he's just like, yeah, wait till the album comes out. The first song is called Miracle Man. And I took this Jimi Hendrix riff and I just kind of turned it into it. You'll hear it when it comes out. And we're like, okay, we'll listen for it, you know? So he's telling us all this stuff. But yeah, that was probably,
what was it like for you being a huge Randy Rhoads fan? You know, we did a whole episode about watching him in concert. And now
I remember.
Yeah, and now talking to not his replacement, but the guitar player in Ozzy Osbourne's band.
Yeah, I do remember specifically asking Zach. I'm like, are you going to play, when you play the older songs, are you going to play Randy Rhoads' solos? And I remember Zach saying, I'm going to play those solos to the best of my ability, note for note, because in my opinion, it'd be a disgrace to Randy Rhoads not to. His solos are just as important to the songs as Ozzy's vocals and melody lines. And so I plan on playing Randy's solos, note for note, because and he was a huge Randy Rhoads fan too. So I remember when he answered the question, I was really pleased. I was happy to hear that he had respect for Randy and was going to acknowledge Randy's work and play it on the tours coming up with Ozzy. So Randy Rhoads obviously still my number one and my favorite, but much respect to Zach for saying that to me and for actually doing it after I saw him play live for the first time. Like, yep, he's doing exactly what he said he's going to do.
In the meantime, he was evolving into a Viking.
Yes. Yeah, I knew skinny, clean-cut, big hair Zach in the very, very beginning before he became who he is today.
Well, yeah, I remember those early, videos and the live footage from that tour. And now what he is now, I mean, I'm a huge Black Label Society fan. And now when I go see him, it's like, he just got off the ship and he's a pirate Viking guy. And, they go from each town to town on a pirate ship.
Right, exactly. Remember when he was in Rockstar and they made him shave his beard off and get him all clean cut again?
I don't remember that.
And then, yeah, he was in the movie Rockstar. He was the lead guitar player for Steel Dragon.
Yes.
So, he got to keep his long hair, of course, and then they had him shave the beard off. So he was all clean cut for the movie, and then as soon as he was done with the movie, he grew his beard back out.
I do remember that now, yes. So then where did it go from there?
Yeah.
You had your first experience, at the Cat House, seeing, Take Me Down and Faster Pussycat, Pretty Boy Floyd. You saw Zakk Wylde, all the flyers, the chicks everywhere. Where does it go from there for you?
Yeah. Well, I remember going back again. I was there. I went there in '87, and then I went back again in '88 and '89, and things like that. So I went back pretty much every year after that for a while. And one of the, like I mentioned before, one of my friend's bands from Chicago had relocated there. So I remember going out there to staying at their house, and then they were playing a huge show at the country club. And this turns into an interesting story too. So Tommy Gunn is playing with Jailhouse. You remember Jailhouse, the guys that were in Rough Cut, and they formed a new band?
I do remember them.
So Tommy Gunn and Jailhouse are playing at the country club. And so obviously we're there because I'm staying at Tommy Gunn's house. So in the audience that night was Vince Neil and Dave Mustaine from Megadeth, and I think this part gets a little hazy. Somebody from Ratt. Was it Stephen Piercy? I think it was Stephen Piercy. So, they're all off tour. They're all hanging out at the country club that night. So the show ends, and Vince Neil invites us all back to his house for an after-hours party. We're like, are you fucking kidding me? And so Vince Neil had a limousine waiting for him out front, and he basically tells us, my limousine's out front. Follow me back to my house. And we're like, fuck yeah, let's go. So, all the guys in Tommy Gun and me and my brother was out there. My sister was at the show. We all jumped in our cars. There is this huge limo and then a trail of cars leaving the country club, all driving into the hills to Vince Neil's house. So I remember Vince Neil's limo goes up. He was in a secure neighborhood. So the limo comes out, goes to the front gate. The guard comes out. You see Vince Neil talk to the guard and then pointing to all the cars behind him, saying, "Yeah, these people, let them all let them all come to the house." So the gate opens, the limo goes through. All of us follow Vince Neil to his house. Limo drops him off. We park our cars, and I'm like, I can't believe this is actually happening. And I walk up and I ring the front doorbell, and Vince Neil opens the door, and he's like, "Hey, come on in." And so we came in, and he had this huge party, and it was awesome. I remember being in his kitchen and having a one-on-one conversation with him, and about they just got off of the tour for Wild Side.
Girls,
and
girls,
he
girls.
was saying, girls, thank you, girls, and we were talking about that, and the thing that was kind of sad was that the one thing I do remember that was kind of sad is that's when him and Charisse were going through some problems. And there was a picture of him and Charisse from their wedding day that he had put face down on the counter. And I just remember walking by that, and it was kind of, that was the sad part, because you could tell he was like in a lot of pain and hurting over it, but he was still trying to be gracious and open up his house to all of us. And he wasn't drinking at the time, he said. He's like, "I'm not drinking, but the bar is in here, so help yourself to whatever you want." And so you go into his man cave area, and the walls were just covered with gold and platinum albums. And he had this huge pool table, and then he had this huge bar, and he just completely opened up his house to all of us. And who was I at the time? I was just a guy in a band out of Chicago that was on vacation in California, and here I am at Vince Neil's house talking to him in his kitchen. And I remember also having a conversation with Dave Mustaine, and we were talking about when he was in that movie, Decline of the Western Civilization, and we were talking about how his song closed out the movie, and it was just awesome. I mean, that was like one of my other favorite experiences from going out to California. I mean, just by chance, being able to go to Vince Neil's house and then hang out with other, rock stars of that time. So it was pretty amazing.
That is pretty crazy, considering he's inviting pretty much unknown people to his house. And,
right.
I mean, I can't imagine that happening today with, how people are, and with Facebook, and everyone's walking around with a camera, in their back pocket. I don't know if that could happen today. I mean, you're telling a story, and I'm envisioning it how I'm envisioning it. Everyone's going to have their different vision of it, but that's just remarkable how he was just like. And how many people were there, do you estimate?
Probably about 40 or 50 people. So there was Vince Neil, and he had some of his handlers, I guess you would call it, because they were kind of walking down the house, making sure nobody was doing anything they weren't supposed to. And they're just like, "Hey, it's cool if you're here, but, please don't take any pictures or anything," type of thing. And then that was it. I mean, everyone was like very cool and laid back, and you're absolutely right. It probably wouldn't happen today because of cell phones and stuff, but back then, no one had any other than, a Kodak Instamatic camera. That's all anybody had, and they just asked us not to take any pictures. Somehow, I got away with taking one picture. There was a picture of me and my brother in the man cave with all the gold and platinum records behind us. And we got one picture in, and that's when they're like, "Oh, no pictures." So we got the one. So I do have documentation of being at Vince Neil's house.
There you go, man. You got to get one, right?
Yep. So, so you're right. I just don't think, I don't think things like that happen anymore. But that was, back then, things were different, and it was just, everyone was just, rock star or no rock star. Here you got Vince Neil going to a local club to see local bands play on his night off or whatever. And then, deciding to have an after hours party and inviting a bunch of strangers over. I mean, I still to this day can't believe that even happened. I mean, I got to experience it. So, it's insane. But that was part of that whole scene. Things were, that whole Sunset Strip scene that just goes to show those things. What happened then and what the things that went on back then that will never happen again.
You went out there quite a few times, and what were some of the other things that you experienced and saw? I mean, you've been to the Rainbow, you've been to all these other clubs like the Troubadour and the Whiskey. What other stories do you have rubbing elbows or seeing things? I mean, imagine, at a Friday and Saturday night or any night at the Rainbow, you're going to see something.
There's probably more stories that I can't think of off the top of my head. But there was always something going on. I remember going to was it the Whiskey? Yeah, it was the Whiskey, and going upstairs to the second level, and there was just a couple having sex in a booth right in the open, and nobody cared. They were just going at it, and I'm just like, wow, only in California, only in Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't going to happen. I don't think that was going to happen. At least if it was happening around here, I didn't see it, but it was definitely happening out there.
You also had Tower Records, which was right there in the scene too, as well. I mean, you had this big record store, this big, recognizable name record store that everybody knew about. There was one in Hollywood, there was one in South Bay. Later on, they franchised, and there was a couple here in Chicago. That had to be a cool experience too, because they would have these artists come in and sign autographs. They would do album release parties, all that stuff.
Oh man, that Tower Records was huge. It was amazing. Just rows and rows and rows of albums and rows of cassettes, and you could go in there, and they were 24 hours too. I didn't know if you knew that or not, but no. They were 24/7, 24 hours, 7 days a week. You could go in there at any time and shop or do whatever. I think I even heard stories about how Jim Belushi would go in there like at 3 a.m, all coked up, and he would go in there and buy records and stuff. But yeah, at any given moment, it was like right in the heart of the Sunset Strip. So, and it being 24/7, actors, actresses, and musicians would pop in there at any given moment. You never knew who you would see there. And that was like the same with the Rainbow. The Rainbow was like the mecca for conjuring, getting together and meeting up with people. So any given moment, you never knew who was going to be in there. So yeah, but God, Tower Records. Man, do I miss that place. It was so cool.
Even the one here in Chicago even the one here in Chicago and the suburbs was just awesome too. I mean, they were open till I think midnight or 1 a.m. And I remember dropping my girlfriend off, and then, or whatever, at like 11:30, and I would drive over there and just buy a couple albums and go home. And I would just sit in my room and I would listen to some, new cassettes or CDs that I got. And it was awesome. I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, there was Tower. Which Tower Records did you used to go to? Because I used to go to the one that was by Stratford Square in Bloomingdale.
I went to the one in Schaumburg near Woodfield.
Okay. Oh, that's right. There was one right on Gulf Road.
Yeah.
By like where TJ Maxx is now or something like that. But
yeah, I think it's like outdoors store now or something like that. Or
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I remember we would do Christmas at my parents' house, and after Christmas dinner and stuff, we would jump into the car and we'd drive to the Tower Records because they were open on Christmas. This was before all the other retailers were open, but Tower Records, their whole thing was we're open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, no matter. Well, I don't know if they were 24 hours, but they were at least 7 days a week, right? So we would go there on Christmas night and take our Christmas money that we just got and buy records and CDs and stuff. And I remember going there when Anthrax was doing a record signing, and I had, at the time, I owned a Jackson Scott Ian model guitar, and I brought it into the store, and Scott Ian signed it. So, yeah, that's another thing. The record stores of the day that are no longer around.
Yeah, I miss that place.
Yeah, me too, buddy.
What if you were to tell me the most surprising, or the person that surprised you the most of seeing that person on the Sunset Strip? Who would that be?
That surprised me the most?
Yeah, like you did not expect to see them or run into them while you were hanging out on the Strip.
The Zakk Wylde meeting him was pretty amazing. Met a couple porno stars also on the Sunset Strip.
Surprise.
Right? And Ron Jeremy, God, he was fucking everywhere. He was back then. Apparently, he still is now.
And he was fucking everywhere.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. I still remember when Lemmy was alive, seeing him playing video poker at the Rainbow. And he was always drinking his Jack and Coke and playing his video poker games, and he was just kind of hanging out and doing his thing. Oh, geez, I know there was a few others, but
what was
just reminiscing about that time.
For the people that are not familiar, what was it like to be at the Rainbow? So, the Rainbow itself is just it's really just a restaurant with a small bar in the back, and then a little bit bigger outdoor bar. So the place itself is not really that impressive. It's just like an old school restaurant and with a small bar. But because of its location, it was just the place to be. But just in general, it's just the restaurant part. What made that cool was that they would have pictures and posters of rock stars on the walls. So if whatever booth you sat in, you never knew what picture was going to be in there. It could be a picture of Dio, or it could be a picture of Ozzy, or it could be a picture of Guns N' Roses. So the part with the rock and roll memorabilia hung all over the walls. That part's cool. Running into any given celebrity at any time, that part was cool. But just the building itself is not really isn't a big deal. It's just the reputation that it has and its location that made it legendary. And even to this day, when I go out to California, in fact, I was lucky enough to get to play at the Whiskey 2 years ago when I was out there with Janet Gardner from Dixon, when I was playing guitar in her band. So I got to play at the Whiskey, and then after sound check, I went to the Rainbow and had dinner, and it still looks the same. In 2017, it looked the same as it did in 1987. They have not changed that building whatsoever. Still had all the rock and roll memorabilia on the walls. Still kind of dark.
had the booths were all like half circle, vinyl booths with tables where you hear the stories of bands getting blowjobs on the table, like that. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't changed. It's the same as it was when I went there for the first time 30 years ago.
When you talk about the early part of the scene, we mentioned, Motley Crue and Ratt, Quiet Riot. There were other bands too as well, like Rough Cut that we just mentioned, and Black and Blue, and Wasp, and Dokken. All those bands coming up to the later years of the scene. You mentioned the Pretty Boy Floyds, the Faster Pussycats. We can also talk about bands like South Gang that were all part of that scene, all part of that moment. And now it's completely different. Now you have the Troubadour's still there. The Viper Room, has bands. Whiskey does. The Roxy, is that still there?
The Roxy has turned to a couple different venues, but the building itself is still there.
Okay.
I believe. Whiskey's identical to how it was from back in the day. Rainbow's identical. Troubadour's identical. Roxy's gone through a few changes, and then Gazzari's no longer exists. And that's the thing that's really sad. Like I said, I played there. I played at the Whiskey 2 years ago, and before, you'd walk out the doors of the Whiskey, and there's people everywhere, and bands everywhere, and rock and roll fans everywhere. And now, you walk out my experience 2 years ago, walking out the front door of the Whiskey, and you're surrounded by, corporate restaurants and banks, and it's just like there is no scene at all. I mean, at all.
Yeah.
You don't see people hanging out on the Sunset Strip anymore. You see people parking their car, getting valet parking, and then going inside the Whiskey. Or you see people, going to the Bank of America, or going to the sushi restaurant or whatever. But the rock and roll scene, or the music scene in general, it's non-existent. There's just it's no different than us going to a club to see a band around Chicago where the club is located in a strip mall next to a Jewel Osco or something like that. There's just no scene. You go to the venue, you go in to see the bands, you leave, and that's it. There's no hanging out. There's no scene.
And
it's sad.
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, one of the contributing factors to that too is younger people don't go out as much as our generation did. They're staying at home. They're streaming movies. They can watch live performances on YouTube. They can do all that, and they're not going out as much as they used to. And they're also not as especially the bands are not partying as hardcore as the bands once did. I don't know if that really contributes to the scene, but I was talking to the guitar player for this band Station that's out of New York, and they're a relatively new band. And he said something really interesting, that the scene now is planet Earth. Bands can reach anyone, anywhere by Spotify, YouTube, social media, and they don't have to develop a following locally where they're from. Right.
And that's absolutely correct. I mean, and this is for maybe another subject to talk about someday, but have you seen the Twisted Sister documentary?
I have
where
not.
They talked about how, so they, bands back then used to get these residencies where they would play 5 nights a week at a club and do 5 sets a night. And they would they'd do that, they'd spend a week at this club, and then they go to another club, and then they go to another club, and they would have to build their draw that way. As opposed to now, which is, open up a YouTube channel and throw your video out there, and how many hits can you get,
Mm-hmm.
And then you got shows like, American Idol, where you just walk on a TV show, bunch of producers dress you up and have you sing some songs, and then if you do well enough and make it to the finale, now we'll give you a record deal. And it's nobody pays their dues like they did back in the day. You know, I mean, the Twisted Sisters and the Motleys and the Van Halens. Van Halen playing backyard parties, you know, for years before they made it. I mean, none of the bands do that now because they don't have to.
I had a conversation with Mark LaBelle from Dirty Honey a few New Music Spotlight episodes ago, and we were talking about the same thing about the amount of hours that bands have to put in to really get traction for themselves and to get on a tour and to get noticed on social media. So I do think that rock music still has that you got to pay your dues. I think it's a lot harder now in terms of getting noticed, especially when you factor in all the social media platforms, when you factor in none of these fucking tours this coming summer are having any new rock bands on it, which fucking is total bullshit. I get pissed every time I think about it, as you can tell. So they got to go out. They got to go out on their own. They got to do like I saw Tyler Bryant, Temperance Movement, Dirty Honey, and the Amazons are touring this winter. There's other examples of that too. The scene is over. The scene's never coming back. There's no infrastructure for rock and roll. I've touched on it here several times in previous episodes. And, the bands have the benefit of reaching anyone they want, but the flip side to that is it doesn't matter if no one knows who you are. And the only way to get traction and people to notice you is to play or get on a tour, which is rare now, or you just got to keep at it, and you got to have the right people around you. You've got to have the right publicist. You got to have the right management team. And you got to be on a record label, whether small or large, that can get you on a tour or get you noticed somehow, some way. And it's sad. You mentioned the American Idol. There's people out there that think all they need to do is know how to sing in the shower, and they're ready for American Idol, and that's how it's done. And that is absolutely ridiculous. It's not how it's done. And
you're right. I wish it was. Well, that's the thing. You mentioned earlier. Nobody goes out to see live music anymore because they're in the digital world of computers and gaming and YouTubing and Spotifying and streaming and Netflixing and all that stuff. This is before both of our times, but I heard Chicago back in the late 70s, early 80s had a really thriving music scene. And there were rock bars in Schaumburg and in St. Charles, and these places were open. This was when the drinking age, I think, was 19. So, you had bands playing every night of the week somewhere in a different part of the Chicago area, and they could sustain themselves. And then they would get noticed and get record deals, in that way. But at one point, Chicago did have a music scene. And it wasn't just the Thirsty Rail. There was like places with beginnings in Schaumburg and places like that. And then when the drinking age changed, and then with MTV and videos, and now all the technology and streaming and stuff, now there's no scene to go to. People stay home.
Yeah, I mean the height of it was the MTV generation in the '80s. I mean, a band that. And that was the other, before I start this, conversation here really quick, that was how it was done. Like, bands were signed on talent, not because of followers. So if a record label or a producer got wind of a band that was good, the record label would sign them, and they would have 3 albums at least to develop their fan base. It wasn't like if their first single dropped and it didn't do anything, they would be dropped from the record label. Look at all the bands that we've talked about. Motley Crue, Too Fast for Love, Shout the Devil, Home Sweet Home, 3 albums. Then on and on. Look at Bon Jovi. Bon Jovi's another great example. Their debut album had the hit Runaway. Their second album fell flat, and then they exploded with Slippery When Wet. There are examples after examples of that happening in the 80s. And I think in the late 80s, in the early 90s, that started to change. You know, that started, like, if you were able to get on MTV and your first single did not resonate, you might get a second chance with another single, or the record company would just say, you know what, we're not going to release another single. After this album cycle, you're done. And I think, it started to change then. You know, if you didn't come out and be, you know, MTV was like the place to be, and record labels started to pay MTV to get their videos on more and more, you know, into the cycle, into the wheel, and it became, you know, a machine. Now MTV doesn't even play videos, so it doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah, because it went from late 70s, early 80s, where you had to play, you know, 5 sets a night and play at different clubs, and people actually had to physically come see you. And so there was that scene, and then there was the whole MTV scene that you had just talked about, and then now nothing. So, I mean, I read or actually heard an interview where David Coverdale was saying that, you know, for a long time, Whitesnake was not popular in the United States, but once Still the Night got airplay on MTV, that changed everything for him and for Whitesnake. He said he probably would have had to have toured it heavily and really worked that album if it wasn't for, you know, MTV. So MTV broke Whitesnake in the States. And so they did that. MTV broke a lot of bands that way.
Yeah, it was a machine. I mean, it was like you get your video on MTV, radio would see how popular it became, they would start playing it. I mean, rock music was predominantly what was played on the radio in the mid to 80s to the mid 90s. And I mean, it was like you had 2 rock stations, you had, you know, 2 or 3 in larger markets, 1 or 2 in smaller markets, but you had the infrastructure in place. And unfortunately, as time moves on, the infrastructure has disappeared. The ability to get your music in front of people that resonates has become harder. Even though it's easier to get it out, you still got to connect with the people.
Right. Because now it's easier to get it out, but also it's easier to get lost in the digital world with all these other musicians and people who think they're musicians as well. So seems like anybody could start a YouTube channel and release whatever, put out whatever they want. So,
yeah, I just had a conversation with John Strickland from Low Water, who's a band out of Athens, Georgia, and we were talking about how when these bands are making music, there's no one in the room anymore to tell them, no, that's not going to work. No, that's not good. No, that's not ready. It almost seems like they're listening to their own ego. You know, they're believing more, they're believing how great they are. They're believing their own press. But you need 1 or 2 people in the room that tells you, that doesn't sound good. That sounds like crap. You got to keep working at it. And not everyone can do that, right? I mean, if you have a fragile ego, a fragile state, you're not going to like criticism. But it's also almost for the good. I mean, everyone talks about the A&R guys back in the day, but those guys were right 9 out of 10 times. And you know,
the John Collaborators and who's the guy from Arista that was that signed everybody and got them? They were all huge.
Oh God, was it Terry Reid?
He I can't remember off the top of my head, but anyway, you're absolutely right. You had A&R guys who actually had a pulse on what was going on in the scene, and they helped develop and build bands, and would if something sucked, they'd send it back in the recording studio, or would present a full album. This happened to Warrant, in fact. Warrant finished their second record and presented it, and they're like, "Oh, you guys need a single." I think that's when Jeannie Lane went back and wrote Cherry Pie and added it to the record. But at the time, the record was done, and then they said, "No, you guys need a single." And so you had A&R guys guiding bands to do that kind of stuff. Now it's like anybody can get recording software, do stuff on their computer in their bedroom, and then release it, and with no one critiquing it, guiding them, producing them, developing them, there's no guidance. They just do whatever they want. And it's like a wild, wild west on the internet.
I agree. I mean, it is. I mean, there's a lot of great new bands out there. I think there's too many platforms out there because it's hard for people to have one consistent place to go to. I don't know if that will change. I don't know if that will happen, but I like the fact that I can find bands, but I'm a different fan than most. I go and look for it, whereas most people don't. And I think that's what's biggest thing with rock and roll today. I mean, obviously the lack of physical connection is not there anymore for any genre of music, but the fact that there's no infrastructure for rock right now is really hurting it, and it's why it's becoming more and more irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we go to like places like, you know, I've gone to the last few Lollapaloozas, and it's like, they got all these bands that you don't know. And then for me, a couple of years ago, I went and Greta Van Fleet was on one of the smaller stages, and that was like my favorite act of the entire day. And then last summer when I went, all these bands that I've never heard of, but Slash and the Conspirators was on not so small of a stage, but they were my favorite act of the day, and they hardly had anyone in attendance in front of their stage.
Yeah,
they had more people over and at the Perry Farrell DJ computer whatever stage than they did for somebody like Slash, which was by far the best act, in my opinion, the best act of the day. But you know, tell some 16-year-old girl there that's that Lollapalooza, she's not there for Slash. You know, she's there for Post Malone or whatever act is out there.
Yeah, no, that's
right
the
now.
truth.
But
that is the cold.
but yeah, for me, you know,
that is the whole.
My girlfriend and I were probably some of the oldest people at Lollapalooza, and we were at the rock stages to see the rock acts, which were phenomenal. But none of these kids had no idea, no clue. They were not at the Slash stage. They were not the Greta Van Fleet stage. So, you know, they were at the other
EDM stage or whatever, the DJ stage.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
That is the cold, hard truth, my man. But, well, hey, I thank you for doing this. Another great episode. I enjoyed the stories. I enjoyed kind of taking a look back and kind of reliving all these things that happened during our youth. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me back. It's always a great time talking with you and reminiscing about the past. And you know, I'm so glad that I have that in my history, because I can look back and at it and be like, you know what, those were some great moments in time. Those were some great things that were going on, and I'm glad that I got to be a part of it. So thanks for talking with me about it.
I appreciate it, man. The Vince Neil story is a great one. All the stories are awesome. Once again, everybody, Gerald Guzman, this is Jay Scott. This is the Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Hope everyone's having a great holiday season. We will talk again soon. Take care.
Thank you.